Welcome to CISO Interviews, where Affinia hosts cybersecurity executives sharing career advice, actionable insights, and tips so that you can enhance your career and succeed as well.
So we're lucky today to have Anne with us. We'll still give probably a minute or two just to let some of the straddlers to join, and then we'll go with our conversation. So if you're joining, if you don't mind, put yourself on mute until we get to the Q&A session. We'll get to your questions shortly, and then think of as we go. Think of questions. The topic of this session is virtual events and how to make them work in 2025. Specifically, how to engage cybersecurity executives through virtual events. And the specific angle that Anne is bringing to the table is how to leverage tools, AI tools, into addressing some of the current issues with virtual events. So to introduce Anne is a VP of growth at cybersecurity startup called Dropzone. And Ed, if you could say a few words about your role and about the startup.
Sure. First thing would be to make sure that my name shows up correctly. There we go. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you for having me, Misha. I'm thrilled to be here. What we do at Dropzone is we are leveraging AI, not out of the box or bolt on, but we are an AI first technology. And what we do is we field all of the security alerts that come in from the various tools and technologies and have an autonomous AI analyst that then is able to run the alert investigations for the team and then provide an investigation report, allowing essentially SOC analysts to find those needles in the haystack that truly matter and to understand which alerts are real threats versus benign ones or maybe false positives, and hopefully streamline very tedious work and give SOC analysts fun in their day again.
I see. I understand. And so your persona is it more of a SOC analyst or head of the SOC team, or is it the CISO, or maybe both?
It's both. And what we find a lot of times with the CISO is we build the relationship with our CISO and our founder, and then that translates into the CISO, if they're interested, introducing us to their team and the right people to field the demo onwards from there.
Mm-hmm. I understand. So maybe we'll run through some of the issues that we're hearing that people have with virtual events. The most important one, there is the Zoom fatigue is real. Everyone can look at the calendar, and in my calendar, most of the meetings are over Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
I had my first coffee meeting in probably 3 months today, just an hour ago. So most of it over Zoom. And when you send an invite, you're trying to invite someone who's a relevant potential client to Zoom, there is almost visceral reaction. It's something I want less in my life, not more.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience with Dropzone or through other engagements, what is your advice to overcome or mitigate this Zoom fatigue?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And on that note, I really appreciate all of the attendees today for dealing with the Zoom and hoping not to have fatigue. So from my perspective, the kind of 30,000-foot view takeaway is look for the win-win. So whether you're sending invites to a group, or it could be a webinar or podcast or something like this today, much as Misha and team did, ask the registrants in advance, do you have any questions? Try to pull those people in and find what's relevant to them. If you're meeting one-on-one, like a virtual coffee talk, or such as Affinia's CISO introductions to, founders, you really want to try to do a little bit of homework on that person you're meeting with and find a way to be relevant. It's all about building that relationship. I think why we're so tired of Zoom, at the end of the day, we've had 10 Zoom calls. We really don't want to see or talk to anyone else. And yet we're craving that in-person back and forth, right? And that's all because technically we've turned into 2D. Half the time we don't know if we have an AI twin joining or just somebody, taking notes that's an AI bot and people don't even bother joining. And you're missing that rapport and building a relationship with people. And I think it's all about that and finding a way for people to say, you know what? It's a Zoom call or it's a podcast, but it's totally worth me joining because I get such key takeaways and an exciting discussion.
Interesting. And any more kind of nuanced and technical suggestions, maybe asking questions ahead of time? Because often I get invitations, I get emails inviting me to very technical sessions
Mhm,
that look like demos. Uh,
mhm.
I feel if it's not really clear for me. I'm not in the target. I'm not within the persona. It's just
Which is mistake number one, right?
not to me by mistake, but I'm wondering if in that vein, should those virtual sessions, should they focus on the technical aspects of the solution, be more of a demo? Should they focus on the problem
Mhm.
that you're solving? Should they focus on pain points and challenges that your people within your ICP are facing? How can you structure the messaging so that people on the other end feel it's for them and it's crystal clear what value they're getting by committing to be on Zoom for half an hour?
Yeah, that's a great question and a nuance at the same time. So you don't want to target everyone, right? Because if I'm bringing in CISOs, for example, CMOs in this scenario, and then perhaps a first-time junior person in marketing, they have very different goals and metrics and day-to-day, right? So you need to know who you're going after, whether you're splitting a Zoom into one event is for CISOs, another one is perhaps for practitioners. You need to be targeted and precise because that then allows you to do your homework. You can use something like Perplexity if you wish. You can type in what are the pain points for practitioners, for example, with security analysts, and it'll give you all of the nitty-gritty sources of Reddit conversations, the real kind of feedback that you typically have been looking for in social media of what are people caring about? What are they dealing with day to day? And then if you're looking at the leadership standpoint, it's interesting you mentioned that, Misha. Just got off a call with Gartner, and their whole point is if you're bringing a CISO to the website and you go right into the technology, they could care less. Like they get bombarded day in and day out. They hate their LinkedIn profiles, right? You need to find what is the business outcome? What is the purpose that will help them enable their team to be better, more efficient, save hours, save costs? And if you're not mentioning the pain point, why should I buy this and how will it make my life better? What's the point, right? But again, the buying committee post-COVID is much larger. On average for cybersecurity, it's 25 people.
Oh, wow.
So it's really tricky to learn who plays what role, at what point of the buyer journey are they jumping in, and what are they caring about? And the more you get to know your customer, the more compelling your content and relevant it can be. Because if
And the 25 people, is it within the cybersecurity team or is it CIOs, CTOs, and procurement, and CFO, and CEO, and the board? I'm
Great
just wondering
question.
if it varies company to company.
It depends on company size. In enterprises, it's literally just a security team. If you look at mid-sized organization, it would include, for example, the CFO or procurement. It depends, but again, right, you need to know who you're talking to because what we find mostly, and I found this in other roles in cybersecurity as well, the CISO is that kind of hot ticket item. Everybody wants to talk to the CISO, but what the CISOs keep doing is they keep punting you to their teams, right? Yes, this is worth it. And the key there is if you're relevant, you're building a relationship. Sometimes at these CISO dinners or brunches, the founder will talk about his passion for racing cars. And if that jives with whoever he's talking to, they're building a relationship. They may not once talk about the product, but what it ends up as is, hey, sure, meet with me and my team. Or they make sure that their team takes the time to really look at the technology, right? And those are kind of the nuances that you have to look for.
Interesting. We have the exact same experience because when we started hosting live events, and not to take us on off topic, but I expected people to talk about the latest breach or the latest
Mhm.
regulation or SAC charge that CISO personally or things like this. They talk about families and hobbies and travel and dogs, and it's fascinating. So it goes again, building the relationship and playing the long game, not going transactional right off the bat is probably the right way to go. But I want to double click on something that you mentioned um, about AI tools.
Mhm.
Uh, some of the content is it's not visible. A private Slack conversation or a private Discord channel. Not everything is on Reddit, and I think Reddit. It seems like a lot of people are fairly junior. Maybe they're SOC analysts, but I don't think a lot of CISOs are creating content or consuming content. Probably creating content, and a lot of them are behind logins and not exactly accessible even to most robust LLMs, I would imagine. How efficient do you find AI tools in crafting the messaging to resonate with the audience, especially given that not all of it is public? What would be your advice?
My advice is to use the AI tools for the practitioners and the end users. And as far as CISOs go, it's communities like yours, Misha, with Affinia, can have those discussions to understand what the CISOs truly care about. Because how often do you go and host a dinner as a head of marketing and say, okay, we're going to give you the 2-minute pitch and we're going to talk all about SOC teams and the pain points. CISOs are already thinking, okay, I hope I get another drink soon, right? Whereas who's asking them, what are your top 3 initiatives this year? They change year over year. How are you doing with those? Are you stuck at one and you can't get any further? What matters? Because at the end of the day, every company thinks their cybersecurity tool is the best thing since sliced bread, right? But starting a little bit higher of what are your concerns? What are your biggest things you're looking out for this year? How are you thinking about AI, right? Right there, that'll tell us in Dropzone, are they forward and strategic thinking? Are they more kind of like the people on the back burner waiting to see what happens with the rest? Are they concerned about AI? How are they thinking about this? And a lot of times there, you can get those nuggets as well of those personal conversations like events like this of, should we tweak our messaging? If we said we're an autonomous SOC team, people would run for the hills because it's not possible today to let something be autonomous, right? We talk about AGI and agents. That sounds great. Frankly, it scares the what out of most people because are you sure this thing can run on its own? And then next, my toaster will be chasing me down in my kitchen, right? It's just not possible. So we can overpromise, but we have to understand also the friction and how people are thinking. And the way that we can do that is by at the leadership level, having events like this and being able to have even breakout sessions. There's so many more tools than Zoom today that you can use. We can literally have people, you can have 3 different discussions and you can drag your icon over to this topic. When you've had enough, you go over to that topic. And you're providing a lot more value. And you're also allowing people virtually to kind of mingle as they would in, for example, a cocktail hour or an in-person dinner without being stuck somewhere and saying, well, this is really not relevant to me. Let me move over here. Right. And building relationships with each other beyond having to deal with the vendor.
And on that note, so we used our best knowledge and best tools available to craft messaging that we think will resonate with the audience. We tiered the audience, so we have one story and one message for senior executives, potentially a little bit more nuanced story and more nuanced messaging for practitioners, so that we're on point and on message and on brand for different personas. We structured that event, and now people showed up. How do we keep them engaged? How to make sure that they're not off camera, off mic, and then doing something else? And what will be your advice?
Good question. So number one, I think it's when there's a smaller group like this, allowing people to jump in and ask their questions throughout or provide their thoughts, because now they can be engaged versus having to wait their turn, right? So that would be one example. And so if that's resonating with you, Darren, start shouting at us, we'll unmute you. Another way is to lost my chain of thought here. Oh, another way to keep them engaged, I think a prime example, I don't know if any of you are familiar with David Spark and the CISO series.
Of course. He's a good friend.
He takes it to an extreme, right? He has gamification. He has crazy wonky noises in the background where most technical founders get a heart attack the first time you put them on one of these shows and you're sponsoring an episode. But people love it because it's different. It's fun. They have polls. You can contribute on the chat on the side. You can see you have a repeat audience in the CISO series where people are just dying to communicate and chat, and they have a blast. And it's much more than learnings. Yes, there are learnings, but it's also a kind of like a social networking hour for them.
Certainly. So, okay, so now we crafted the message. We send the invites. People showed up. They're engaged. And
Are you inviting all the people to the same event?
The most important, well, we're not inviting the same. We're stratifying them to make sure that the group is more or less homogenous. So CISOs in one room and SOC analysts in the other. We figured out ways to keep them engaged. Now the money question: how to make sure that these events or these conversations convert to follow-ups and pipeline.
Yes, and that's the cliffhanger, right? Because today with the dark funnel, People are going back to communities again. You don't really know what kind of conversations are happening on the side. If I'm looking at a vendor, the first thing I do is I go to my main Slack groups for marketers and I ask, hey, have you worked with this company? What was your experience? How did you measure ROI? Was it worth it? When I have my short list, I'll go take that and go fishing and do my own research on that 3 to 4 vendors. But what that means for people like us is how on earth do we prove the value, especially with events, whether they're in person or virtual. Virtual tends to convert a little bit faster, but a little bit faster in cybersecurity is still 2 quarters plus, right?
Wow.
We were extremely fortunate with Affinia to have a conversion in quarter. I think all of the stars aligned and it's been fantastic. And again, our CEO resonated with that company, but that's an outlier, frankly.
Mhm.
And so the way to track that obviously is the best you can put that initial source into your CRM and understand where that person came from. But at the end of the day, what makes things successful is if people say, hey, in a different community, you have to check out this event, or this is the best podcast on AI and marketers that I can find today. I listen to it every single week. It's really word of mouth. And again, how do you measure that? It's like looking at the tip of an iceberg. You have to be patient. You can't throw something at a wall and rip it off before it can stick, right? And this is a massive pain point for CMOs to try to deal with their founders and especially board members who are like, 2 quarters later, don't do that again. It didn't work, failed. No, you haven't given it enough time, right? Because something we do that is the silliest thing ever, it's so effective. We put into the form fill at the demo request level, how did you hear about us? We get things like ChatGPT, Affinia, word of mouth. My CISO told me I have to meet with you. Aha, now we're starting to learn what's working. Then as those form fills come in, I'm ruthless with my poor sales team and I say, when you get on that call, ask, what community? What did they say, right? And they have to do it because when the call is done, I'm going to ping them on Slack and say, so what did you find out? So I'm leaving them no room for error, but that's the kind of manual digging you have to do. And the more you can do that with your sales team, the more the sales team can inform you of what is and is not working. In addition to the form fill and your original source, you can start cross-referencing and seeing where the commonalities are.
Mm-hmm.
Now you know what's working and what isn't. And over time, if the sales team sticks around long enough, which is always a debate at this point, then they'll see the worth of sharing that information with you because now you're delivering much better leads.
This episode is brought to you by Affinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.affinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. And there are so many rabbit holes we can tumble into based on your answer.
Mm-hmm.
One of which is this dilemma that sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. There's perception that salespeople are converting intent into closed won, and marketing is in the business of generating demand. So fundamentally, sales are playing the short game, trying to find people who are ready to go from first conversation to closed won in a quarter or two.
Mm-hmm.
And marketing is playing a much longer game.
Correct.
Generating that demand, identifying the persona, identifying the story, the messaging, and creating those touch points along the way, knowing that it will take substantially longer, which creates a little bit of a tension internally, but also if the chief revenue officer goes to the CFO and say, hey, we need to hire more SDRs, we'll produce more meetings, we'll close more revenue, and
the numbers game, right? That's what they say.
We'll meet our sales targets and we'll see the results in 3 months. And then the CMO goes to the CFO and would say, hey, there's this virtual events, live events, growth, content, partnerships. And we may know in a year, maybe not, but I really feel that this is how we should spread our chips. And I will not be able to show you return on investment sooner than 10 to 12 months. Very different conversations. And from the CFO perspective, it's of course we need to hire more SDRs. look, every new SDR is creating meetings and they convert. So that's what we want to invest. But then that starts generating those behaviors when SDRs treat everyone as a potential client and they're trying to push everyone to a demo.
Mhm.
And then you see those kind of behaviors that you see flare ups on LinkedIn where CISOs or VP level executives, they complain about all the shenanigans
And publicly shame the poor
Yeah.
BDRs.
Well, sometimes public, sometimes not, but just I hear crazy stories that reek of desperation on the sales part of how they're trying to source those meetings, even though it's clear that there'll be no conversion. They're just a waste of time. So again, long question. The question effectively is, question number one is how do you balance this need to play the long game in the marketing demand generation, especially as you're dealing with budget constraints, you're dealing with the boards and the CFOs. That's question number one. And question number two, importantly, you mentioned attribution from the first someone showed up at your virtual event, then that person stopped at your booth at RSA, then they went to your website, downloaded a case study, then they had a conversation in a private Slack channel or Discord, and then they responded to your SDR and booked a meeting. The SDR raises their hand saying, hey, it's because of me, where's my commission? But it's really all those touches that contribute to how do you think about attribution? So those are kind of two separate questions.
Yeah. Tell me the first one again.
How to balance, how to go against your CRO when you go to CFO and explain if you don't do your job, then they'll have nothing to close.
So I wouldn't go as far as to say you won't see a return in 12 months, but I would say this is more of a long game. The benefit of the long game is your cost per lead will drastically go down, as will your cost per meeting, because the people, when they're ready to talk to you, will be reaching out. The other thing to enlighten CFOs who've been around for a while is the ways are changing. You cannot be stuck in a rut just because things worked in the past. Today, if a BDR reaches out, they're at the mercy, more so than ever, of is the timing right? Do I have a project? Do I have budget, right? The typical band qualification questions. If those don't all add up, forget it. You're a nuisance. You can stay in touch. You can keep pestering. I mean, I have countless agencies bugging me once a quarter, once a month, SDR outsource agencies. Hey, are you ready to talk? Did you guys grow enough? Has nothing to do with growth. The modern buyer journey, people do 80% of their research before they want to be bothered by any human, right? You need to give them all of those materials to be relevant. You need to have an omni-channel approach. You need to be helpful on social. You need to pull people in with video content. You need to show up in AI search results. If you don't, it's a mess because Google organic search is going to continue tanking over time. There are all of these nuances that you have to exactly, Jason, create value before contact, says Jason. You need to be relevant, right? If you're relevant and you're showing your customers that you understand the ins and outs of the day-to-day, what matters, that's when they'll raise their hand and say, you know what, I think you can help me. But if you're just bombarding them from the beginning, that's like I'm walking into a car dealership and the first thing the guy comes running over to me, oh, are you and your husband looking for a car? Mistake number one, hello, I'm here by myself. You didn't do your homework on your demographic. Mistake number two, let me look first. You haven't even given me a chance to settle in, right? There's a difference between helpful and pestering. The BDR model today is no longer working. You have to be relevant before anything else matters. And what you tell your CFOs, you explain the modern buyer journey, you provide the proof points. Sixth Sense says it takes, I don't know, 80, 112 touches of various components before somebody's ready to reach out. And by the way, when that 80% of research is done by your buyer, if you're not the first vendor to respond, your odds have been reduced by 78%. Good luck, right? So you can still have BDRs. The sales team should always be prospecting. Case in point, during the holiday season, when there are downtimes, they have to do their work as well because it's not always going to be an inbound motion that's constantly filling the funnel. But you need to be relevant, and the CFO needs to understand that those ways are no longer working. You need to have a combination of strategies to pull everything in. And then to the second point, and also those leads that come on their own and raise their hands and say, hey, I'm ready, they convert that much faster too. The sales cycle is shorter. So those are all savings. May not be short-term savings, but long-term, you'll save the company a ton and you have traction that's repeatable and scalable. And that's what VCs want and board members. Where's your product market fit? I can get a $20 million deal in, If it's one opportunity, at best you have product solution fit. That doesn't mean a thing, right? So you need to build that demand. And then when it comes to making sure that you have leads that convert in quarter versus what have you, it's tricky. Marketing, like we always say, it's not an exact science. You need to be able to go out on a limb, you need to have predictions, but all of that and being able to go out on a limb is still based on data points. If I do X, I'm expecting at least these 5 indicators to happen, CFO. If they don't, we're not on the right track. If people aren't engaging in X content pieces, with X content pieces, it's a bust, right? So that's really making sure that you're building your alliances with your internal team members as well. You have to build that trust with the CFO because they won't just sign off and say, sure, try it. Let me know what happens. No way.
Certainly. Well, and to your point, it's CFO sometimes they plant a tree and they want to dig it out 2 months later to see how the roots grow. So it's certain programs take a little bit longer to pan out. And the second question about attribution, specifically as related to virtual events, how do you make sure that we capture that attendance and it's one of the touches? And then how do you think about decay, signal decay? So for example, something that happened a year ago probably would have less relevance or less strength in terms of the signal versus something that happened yesterday. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. In terms of avoiding decay, whatever topic you're covering in a virtual event, you need to make sure you have content pieces and other relevant content to send people after the fact, right? So what are those 3 things you can send that are helpful, not salesy, so that they then say, you know what, let me learn more. Maybe they can help me. So finding ways to continue engaging with them. And we found even at Dropzone, when we have a monthly demo webinar, if there aren't enough people who are showing up, we unmute it so people can have a discussion, the audience, right? So we're including them. They can ask live questions that other audience members may think are relevant. So it's no longer kind of we're pitching at you scenario, but we're also finding that the people who are still doing that 80% of their research are opting for the demo webinar so they can learn without necessarily having to talk to sales. When those attendees ask specific questions, we give those people to the sales team and say, hey, person wanted to know, do we handle other alert types in the SOC? Can you get back to them? We didn't get to answer that question, for example, or here's what we answered. Maybe you send them these 3 materials. And that's a way to be helpful, even for including the sales team. They can start building the relationship without, again, immediately selling. When we're looking at shelf life a year or 2 later, it's really interesting because the way, almost comparable to social media, the way you're looking at social media today is no longer about your number of followers, the number of posts you're cranking out, but how good a post was, quality over quantity. If you have 2 consultants, one gives you a post a day, and it gets maybe, I don't know, 1,000 to 2,000 views, right? You have another consultant who gives you a video a month, but that video on one platform took off and went viral. That's the video that's going to fill 80% of your pipeline for the next year. You just need one. So my comment there would be, don't be afraid to test, right? So if this event had, let's say, 500 attendees in it, and you said, you know what, that performed much better than the other 5 events with other marketing heads. Guess what? Now you can put paid ads behind this because you've proven it works organically. Now you can go make money off of it and bring in more people. So just because something has a longer shelf life, you can't just stick it on your website and hope people find it, or on LinkedIn once. You have to continue getting it out there, showing different points, and maybe saying, you know, we had these 3 questions. Bless you. Darren sneezed. You had these set of questions. What do you think about creating a content piece on that? And you can reach out to the audience and say, would you like to hear about these topics as well? We're more than happy to create that. So always finding ways to re-engage and pull them back in.
Absolutely. And specifically on content, obviously, most of the sessions are recorded, and what will be your advice on making sure that we get this long shelf life and we get another bite at the apple? So it's not just the people who attended live session, but also once the content is recorded, what are the best practices and what are the suggestions so that we create those artifacts? So when people are doing their research, they're findable. What will be your advice?
Repurpose like crazy, right? So the first thing is create promo video snippets out of this and put those in different social channels, raising different points that were discussed. If you want to learn more, check it out. Then going into other communities. For example, on the marketing front, there are probably 12 Slack communities I can think of where I can say, hey, I participated in this, go check it out and post it in there, right? Kind of that shameless plug. And oh, by the way, if you want to work at Finia, with Finia, I can make an intro and no, I don't get anything for it, right? So finding those multiple ways to feature, you can create a blog post, you can pull the transcript. Think of the different ways that people engage with your content, know your target audience, know where they spent their time, and repurpose different pieces from that. You could even create a series, right? Then you can do something like go to the Cybersecurity Marketing Society and say, hey, would you like to speak? Check out this content piece. So now you're spreading it even larger outside of that little target that you had beforehand.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with this in mind, it seems everyone, both cybersecurity executives and cybersecurity marketers, LinkedIn is where everybody lives and where everybody spends their time. And but at the same time, I'm looking at someone like Chris Walker, who's seems to be omnipresent. He's playing with TikTok. So do you have any experience or any advice on leveraging for repurposing the content from virtual events, leveraging platforms other than kind of the usual suspects, the LinkedIn and probably Twitter next, but are you playing with other platforms? YouTube probably the third one, but
yes, Blue Sky as well to replace X most likely. And so the goal behind that is you should be present on every platform, and we can do a better job of that too at Dropzone. Still, we're working on that, but you need to post on different platforms the same content, but target it or adjust the content, the copy to your audience, right? So Facebook, what kind of demographic lives on Facebook? TikTok, it tends to be younger crowd, right? YouTube Shorts. Is anybody in my or any of my competitors doing YouTube Shorts? That can be a massive opportunity. That doesn't mean you keep posting on all fronts, but the posts that initially worked when you tried to float them out on LinkedIn or whatever your main platform is, for example, if you had a much higher surge in views and engagement, use that, repurpose it across the other platforms, do your homework on who's spending time there, what age groups, and then see, because again, all you need is one of them to take off, right? And then you can go from there. And as far as virtual events goes, you can even localize it. So let's say we're going to RSA next year. What do you do around the local RSA area? If you're targeting only, I don't know, Palo Alto CISOs, for example, you create local ads of a video promo of something like this where you put different snippets together. Hey, only for the next 10-mile range, we're inviting all CISOs. Don't you want to get to know your fellow CISOs? We're hosting this dinner or this cocktail hour. And yes, we will be videoing it. You don't have to be in it. We can video the back of your head, but would you like some brand awareness? Right? And all of a sudden it becomes more of a commodity of, oh, wait, there are limited seats. This is only for our area. I get to know all of my fellow peers. This is cool. And you can be targeted, which means you're not going to blow through your whole ad budget.
Absolutely.
Then you go on site, you host this dinner, cocktail hour, whatever it is. You video it. You create snippets. You figure out who's signed up and opted in or not. Now you have another promo video. It becomes a very different discussion of, I can be in a podcast, I can do a YouTube short, I can write a blog. Those are all different ways to showcase my brand and who I am. But again, people have to get to know you in those different elements, right? And that's a way to create interest and to be different.
This episode is brought to you by Afinia, a community where 2,000 CISOs and other senior executives network, learn, and succeed together. To apply for your complimentary membership, please visit www.afinia.com or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the show.
For sure. Well, just a sidebar note on RSA. You have to be really careful about where you create this content, because I know that you mentioned David Spark. I know that he once showed up at RSA and he was approached by organizers and asking who he was, and
correct.
So it's you need to be.
The disclaimer is stay away from RSA major conferences, but go pick a restaurant, a private room, right? And there you go.
Exactly. Well, we'll just hear your stories specifically about RSA and Black Hat, about how they're coming down on organizations trying to backdraft on the events they're hosting, and specifically about I'm sure it's common news that Palo Alto famously pulled out as a sponsor at RSA, and there was like a big thing that RSA made out of it. This is super helpful, and I guess the last question before we move to Q&A, and it kind of goes back to Zoom fatigue. I see some of the cybersecurity companies playing with different formats of virtual events, so it's not just a solo presentation, it's not just the fireside type chat with CISO who's a client and a subject matter expert, but I'm seeing more some of the off the beaten path tracks. For example, bourbon tasting with a sommelier who explains the different different types, I guess, different flavors, or wine tasting or whatnot. Something that's more mixing business and pleasure, I guess. This is kind of one type. I see some of the different, some in the same, roughly in the same vein, but not exactly your typical solo presentation or fireside chat type engagement. What are your thoughts on the concept? And if you had any experience, what would be your advice to people who are thinking of implementing something like that that's more kind of new and fresh in hopes to get engagement? Specifically, as it relates to some of the executives that are more senior, and to your point, they have a lot of things sent to their way. They may be a little bit jaded. How should we think about threading that needle?
Yeah, I think it's tricky with the whole bourbon tasting or drinks, because a lot of people are into mocktails these days. And when we've tried that at the Cybersecurity Marketing Society, a lot of marketers got one of those kits sent, and we had kind of a test run to see if we wanted to work with the vendor. People spent so much time fiddling with their cocktail mixes that we kind of, I felt as though people were getting lost, right? Doing their own thing. What I think is really cool is if you have some kind of an icebreaker game, for example. So you have a webinar, you expected 100 people, 20 showed up. Hey, what's the first band you listened to? Right? Now people get to know each other, they get to talk. As far as I think having unique ways or angles, it would be interesting to do something like the hot wings contest, something that's spicy and you see people tearing up, right? Something that has them like engaged in a different scenario, just because you had a different experience. You will remember it much more of, man, that hot sauce was terrible. I couldn't even talk afterwards. Now I remember the event, right? And it's taking obviously being a little bit of an imposter of the Hot Ones show on YouTube. But that would be one example. Another one would be maybe having some kind of, for the younger crowds, virtual reality, right? What are you doing with, I don't know, you can have a AI attacking AI cybersecurity solutions. You can have different kind of themes or areas where you can compete, right? Anything of that sort, I think would be interesting. What we did at Dropzone earlier this year, we had a community event. We didn't brand at all that it was from Dropzone, but we basically had security practitioners. It was practitioner focused. A couple of CISOs showed up as well, who were some of the keynotes. But what have you been doing with Gen AI building security solutions? And let's have 10 minutes per person to show off their project. What hurdles did you run into? How did you solve them with AI? Like, hallucinations, what have you? And we had a really big crowd show up that was highly engaged. So trying to think of what are those unique angles that make somebody say, you know what, I'll take a couple hours out of my day. This could be cool. And trying to, somebody in the audience said, getting an emotional response. And that's exactly it.
Yeah, interesting. And this was super helpful. And I really appreciate you taking time and offering your advice and your insights. I would like to open it up to questions. So I'm sure you probably have something to share. So if you could unmute yourself, say a few words about, introduce yourself and mention the organization you're from, please feel free.
Fire away. I do see a question from Jason that is saying, has Dropzone done a Beat the AI event? Are you saying beat AI attackers?
No, actually bring in SOC analysts to beat your Dropzone's AI. Who gets to the result quicker?
We
type of
have
thing?
not. We are thinking about it, and we are potentially thinking of having a human SOC analyst on their own, and then a human SOC analyst leveraging our tool to see what happens.
Yeah, that gives one of them an unfair advantage. No, I was thinking for a yeah, as a contest type of thing.
That's a fantastic idea. If we run with it, I will have to make sure I give you a shout out.
Awesome.
And the
Anybody
reason we haven't done it yet is because we have to pick an alert type, whether it's a
Mhm.
phishing alert, endpoint, what have you. So we'd have to come up with I suppose, very stringent parameters so it's even, right? And that's what we've been working through.
Yeah. Thank you very much for a interesting discussion. I thought that you brought up some very, very valuable points in everything that you presented there.
Thank you for
I think
joining.
I think that's about more about building the relationships because solid relationships lead to those to landing those deals.
Yes.
And it starts with, well, I think that I posted in there, create value before you contact a CISO.
Mhm.
The other, and this is the way that I look at it, it's not just creating the value, but it's also, okay, what are the challenges me as a CISO that I'm facing? How can you solve those challenges for me and come in by first understanding the challenges that I'm facing, not specific in my organization, but at a high enough level that shows that you've done your homework. Show me how your solution or your service can solve that problem
Mhm.
at the gate, but also develop that relationship before talking about your solution, how it can help me. Let's talk about, I think that Misha mentioned dogs. Dogs are always an important topic. Dogs, kids, family, vacation, hobbies, what have you, and create that relationship and then show me how you can solve the problems that I'm facing or problems that you believe that I may be facing if I'm not facing them yet that are up and coming. And then let's talk about your services or your solution or your tool. I think that Dropzone has a very interesting product and definitely a place for them in the market for it. As someone who's done a lot of work with building security operations and leading teams of operators, SOC analysts, threat hunters, what have you. At the end of the day, I don't believe that AI will ever replace a SOC analyst or a incident responder, but they
Mhm.
will definitely augment them.
Exactly. And our intention
Unless you
is
can
certainly
get to a
not to
point where they
replace
can
anyone
contextually.
either.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I said our intention at Dropzone is certainly not to replace anyone either. We're always trying to be clear in our messaging that we want to help a human, right? But we're never there to replace a human.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, I think we have a few questions. Jan or Amina, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I had a question from the audience for you, Anne, and this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
The question from the audience is, what are some key elements that would make content resonate with CISOs? So especially given the diverse priorities that they manage in their roles.
That's a good one. I mean, to me, you have to look at the industry that the CISO is working in because the content will drastically change based on that. And you have to understand the CISOs. You have to do a little bit of digging and research. It's more manual outreach, right? If I'm a head of marketing or a CEO, I don't want to get email blasted. I want to have someone who has done their homework. And that no longer means of, hey, I went to your university. Doesn't matter. That's old, right? Find something else. But what in manufacturing for that CISO is important? What are their major problems? Hey, I know you're busy. Here are 2 ways we've helped your peers, right? Right away building that report or companies X and Y. I mean, we just talked at Gartner before. People keep slapping logos on their websites, cybersecurity vendors. When you click on the logo, FedEx, for example, you end up on FedEx website. I know what FedEx is. Why aren't you sending me to a case study that tells me the ROI? And granted, in cyber, it's extremely difficult because no company wants to tell you, sure, we'll do a case study and we'll stick our name behind it, right? That's certainly nothing we want to give up. But there are ways to build those testimonials or relationships. Or, for example, you can say, there's another CISO in manufacturing. Would you like an intro so you can get to understand how we helped him, right? So finding ways where it's more than just a pitch. It's more than we understand your pain points and how to drive that business outcome and value, but we're also introducing you to a peer you may not know yet. So you guys can start building that relationship. Now it's much more than I'm selling to you. It's I'm bringing additional value.
I have a question, unless someone wants to jump in, I have a question. And it's a little bit tangential to our conversation about virtual events and specifically about how cybersecurity startups should think about hiring someone internally or working with an agency, and kind of along the same lines if you want to share your news.
Sure. So that is a somewhat loaded question because I'm also a co-founder of a growth marketing agency called Cubic Squared. And what it really boils down to in startups is you have a lot of ups and downs until you prove product market fit. And you need to do a lot. Typically, there is a CMO or a VP like myself, and it doesn't really mean much because you are on your own, right? It's you, a bunch of consultants, a number of vendors, and good luck. You're supposed to be strategic. So what ends up happening? You execute on everything because you have to, right? If you're running a campaign, you can't just let it sit. If you have leads coming in, my goodness, it's been a half a day. I've been in meetings. Now I have lead decay. I'm the worst proponent of telling my sales team of what not to do, right? You're left no choice. So you're executing. What happens next? You lose track of the market landscape. You are seen as tactical by your team. Now you have a much bigger problem. How do you get out of the weeds? So to me, agencies, especially ones that leverage AI, and not AI as in I'm going to go give you 20 blog posts. Here you go. I'll charge you the same price. Good luck. But leveraging AI in a way of give me your tone, brand, and voice. Tell me exactly how your positioning and messaging is. Tell me your buyer personas. You don't have any? Let us create those for you. Let us figure out the true pain points today. Put all of that into AI, build a GPT that you can potentially even give your client after the fact, or me, for example, at Dropzone, that I can then leverage to streamline my day-to-day. Now I have surgically precise content for each buyer persona in my audience, and I can execute that much faster. Now I can focus on strategy again. I have my 90 minutes a week back to say, I'm going to be heads down and be strategic, right? And it also offloads some of the pressure because the agency is there to make you successful. The caveat to that is, again, how do you find a good one? Because everybody will overpromise and underdeliver if you're not careful. And then the CFO comes after you or the founder saying, you know, we spent almost more money on agencies and consultants than we did on demand gen. Oops. So again, it's about your network, your communities, which agencies are working, which ones are performing, right? And who do you recommend who's been successful, and making sure that you're also de-risking your partners that you work with externally.
Absolutely. Thank you and congrats, and makes a lot of sense. Any other questions? Don't be shy.
I have another one from the audience, if that's okay.
Sure.
One question was, what common pitfalls do organizations face when designing virtual events for CISOs, and how can they avoid that?
Here are the 3 benefits to your organization and to your team. Now let's jump into the product. And we didn't check your industry. We didn't check much of anything, how long you've been there. We really don't know what your priorities are, and we're just going to hammer you with content, right? That to me is kind of the worst thing a CISO can sign up for. Darren, you've been there on video the whole time.
I was
you're
just
braving
about
us.
to say, first of all, thank you so much. I appreciate all of this. And I especially like the point that we're juxtaposing AI and new technologies against the same old, you have to be good with people. I appreciate that so much. When I was at Amazon, I think of the difference between the people who got the deal and the ones who didn't, were the ones who showed up to learn about me as a person rather than me as a position. And beyond that, it's not just the original sale. It's not just a new vendor. When I was at Omnicom, we dealt with AT&T every day. And yet, in the 10 years that I was there, they still didn't know who we are, and they provided our infrastructure, they provided our networking and data centers. And I'm like, how do you not know who we are? And I find that again and again. That my recent employer, Edgio, every time I met a vendor or someone else, I had to take some time to reacquaint them with who we are, because they immediately want to just jump into, here's my box, here's what I'm trying to sell. How does that fit in your organization? Like it doesn't. But you know what? If you would have listened to me a little bit. So I like that point. I think that's hugely valuable and so easily overlooked. So again, appreciate all of that. And I like that there's a balance here of we are trotting into a painful future of AI and marketing and making videos and TikTok and all that. And yet some of the best lessons are the ones we should have learned already, just, from kindergarten.
I agree. That's much more critical than ever to be
It's,
human. Really appreciate your input.
well, and as you said previously, AI first, but human always. What was it, the line?
Exactly. Because
Darren said something that was very interesting to me. And I
Mhm.
think that this may be a something that vendors, people who want to interact, service providers, whoever, create a dossier of your target is probably the best way to approach it. That way, even if it's not the same person that's communicating with the individual, they have a dossier on that person that includes who they are, what they care about, what their industry is, what their company cares about,
Mhm.
and it can be referenced. And that way, whenever you're interacting with it, one of the things I detest is when a vendor comes to me time after time and I have to explain to them. Darren just highlighted it with AT&T and Omnicom. Uh, and that's a really good example because I think that they did a piss poor job with Omnicom. But my personal feelings on that aside, creating that dossier, creating that portfolio of who the customer is, it's more of a dossier than a portfolio.
Mhm.
And the individual will eventually have a lot of pay a lot of dividends because you can pass it from seller to seller in your organization, and the your target will have a consistent experience because you've done your homework, you've compiled your homework, and you have it in a centralized dossier of sorts where you can say, here, this is the person that you're going to meet. Read up as much as you can on him, on the company before you go and meet him cold. And again, we all hate cold calls. And developing that relationship is something that happens over time. So the dossier should not be something that's created and left alone. It should be
Mhm.
continuously evolving and changing. So that's where you make the human connection and you also create that consistency.
I agree.
Well, and it sounds like there should be a
An
version of
app for that.
certainly. It sounds like there should be a Dropzone version for cybersecurity marketers where you can leverage AI so that you can focus on strategy, and hopefully there would be some sort of iteration of a solution that's for cybersecurity marketers. I know we're coming up on time. Well, I just want to announce that we'll be hosting sessions like this, hopefully every month. So I hope you'll stay tuned. We'll try to keep them focused. We'll obviously keep them focused on cybersecurity marketing. We'll try to keep them focused on specifically experiential aspect of it, whether it's live events or virtual or kind of different formats. Looking forward to you joining us again. And can you mention maybe say a few words about the best way for people to find you?
Yes, I would love to connect with you all on LinkedIn under Anne Gotay, and feel free to check out our website, Cubic Squared, not because I'm trying to sell to you, but that's another way to get in touch with me, and you can give me feedback on if that resonated with you, because you are my target audience and I care about what you think.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much.
such a pleasure, and I
So
really
much.
appreciate you all joining today.
And I know some of you are going to the cybersecurity marketing conference in Philadelphia next week. So if you are, reach out to me, and would love to meet you face to face.
And feel free to stop me if you see me anywhere at the conference.
Sounds good. Well, thank you all. Thank you for joining, and thank you so much. This was amazing.
Thank you.
We'll share the notes and we'll follow your advice in repurposing the content. And I hope you will lend us your hand in this.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode, please subscribe to this channel and visit Afinia.com for more information about your complimentary membership, or click the link in the show notes.